The security guard pointed his flashlight directly at my face while I was skinny dipping in my own lake at 2 o'clock in the morning. "Sir, you're violating HOA regulations regarding appropriate lake usage hours," he announced with the self-importance of someone who thought he had actual authority over me. I stood there, waist deep, in the dark water, completely stunned. This was my property, my lakefront, on the deed I'd paid for with my money. And yet here was this rent-a-cop trespassing on my land at 2 in the morning, telling me I was breaking the rules. As I treaded water, trying to maintain some dignity despite being completely naked, I thought about how quickly my dream home had turned into a nightmare. Little did they know, I had a background in municipal planning, and I wasn't about to let some power-hungry homeowners association run me off my own property. If you've ever dealt with an unreasonable HOA, drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from. Trust me, you're going to enjoy how this story ends. I'd spent 8 years saving for my dream property, a modest cabin on Evergreen Lake with enough land to call my own. As an environmental consultant, I'd always wanted a place where I could disconnect from city life and reconnect with nature. Finding the perfect spot had taken another 2 years of searching. But when I first saw the weathered cedar cabin tucked between towering pines with that pristine lake view, I knew it was the one. The realtor, a cheerful woman named Beth, had been refreshingly straightforward about everything. "This property sits just outside the Evergreen Lake Estates HOA boundary line," she'd explained, pointing to a map. "The previous owner specifically negotiated to keep it independent when they developed the surrounding area 15 years ago. You'll have all the benefits of lake access without dealing with their rather extensive rules and regulations." Beth had rolled her eyes slightly, which should have been my first warning, but I was too enchanted by the sparkling water and the thought of morning coffee on that deck to pay much attention. The price was at the upper end of my budget, but I figured I could make it work. 3 months later, I was officially Basil Kale, proud owner of a lakefront cabin. The first few weeks were everything I'd dreamed of. I spent my mornings watching eagles fish, my afternoons restoring the cabin's weathered deck, and my evenings sitting by a small fire pit near the water's edge. A few neighbors stopped by to introduce themselves, mostly friendly folks who'd been around the lake for years. One elderly couple, the Scotts, brought me a homemade apple pie and warned me that the HOA folks can be a bit much, but just stand your ground. I thanked them for the pie and didn't think much of it. That changed when I met Layla Thalos. She arrived unannounced one Saturday morning in a sleek black SUV. I was on my hands and knees, pulling invasive weeds from what would eventually become a native plant garden. She stepped out wearing designer loafers that were hopelessly impractical for the gravel driveway, and a red blazer that seemed overdressed for a lakeside community. "Mr. Kale," she called out, consulting a small notebook. "I'm Layla Thalos, president of the Evergreen Lake Estates Homeowners Association. I wanted to welcome you personally to our community." I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans before offering one to shake. "Nice to meet you, but I understand my property isn't actually part of your HOA. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, technically, but we consider everyone on the lake part of our community. I've brought some paperwork for you to voluntarily join. The fees are quite reasonable, and the benefits are substantial." She handed me a thick folder, embossed with a green and gold logo. "We maintain the roads, organize community events, and most importantly, protect everyone's property values with our standards." I thanked her politely and promised to look over the materials, but emphasized that I was quite happy remaining independent. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she glanced past me at my cabin. "I notice you're making some changes to the exterior. You should know that even non-member properties are subject to the county's Lake View Ordinance. Any modifications visible from the water need to be approved to maintain the aesthetic integrity of the shoreline." I frowned, confused. "I'm just restoring the existing deck and planting native species to prevent erosion. The realtor didn't mention any special permits needed." "The realtor wouldn't," Talos said with a dismissive wave. "But I assure you the ordinance exists. I'd hate for you to receive a citation." With that thinly veiled threat hanging in the air, she handed me her business card, embossed with the same green and gold logo, and drove away. I stood in my driveway, covered in dirt, holding the folder and feeling a distinct chill that had nothing to do with the autumn breeze. That night, I pored over the HOA documents. The annual fees were absolutely not reasonable. Almost $3,000 per year for services I either didn't need or could arrange myself for far less. The benefits included restrictions on everything from the color I could paint my cabin to how many guests I could have over on holiday weekends. Most disturbing were the bylaws granting the HOA board visual compliance inspection rights for all properties visible from community areas, which basically meant they claimed the right to scrutinize every inch of my property visible from the lake or road. 3 days later, I found the first citation taped to my front door. Notice of Lakeview Ordinance violation, unapproved landscape modification. It demanded I cease all work and submit a detailed landscape plan for approval, along with a $250 review fee. I immediately called the county planning department, only to be told that while there was indeed a shoreline protection ordinance, it concerned environmental impacts like erosion and runoff, not aesthetics. Native plant restoration was specifically encouraged, not prohibited. I tore up the citation and continued my work. The next day there was another one, this time claiming my deck restoration violated architectural standards. Then came a third, about the positioning of my dock. I called the number on Talos's card and got her voicemail. My second message was admittedly less polite than the first. When a sheriff's deputy showed up the following day, I was genuinely shocked. Deputy Gaines was a lanky man with a perpetually tired expression. Got a complaint about unauthorized construction? He explained, not quite meeting my eyes. I showed him my deed, explaining that my property wasn't subject to HOA rules, and invited him to inspect the restoration work, which involved replacing rotted boards with identical new ones. He seemed uncomfortable. "No, Mr. Kale, I'm just responding to the call, but you might want to know that Mrs. Thalos has a lot of friends in the county offices. She's married to a commercial developer, and they've donated to every elected official's campaign for the past decade." That was my first inkling that I was dealing with something more complex than just an overzealous HOA president. After the deputy left, I drove into town and spent hours at the county records office. What I discovered was illuminating. Layla Talos wasn't just married to a developer. She was the CEO of Talos Marina Developments, and they had submitted preliminary plans for a massive marina and commercial entertainment complex on Evergreen Lake, plans that would require control of the entire shoreline. As I tore up the fourth citation that week, my phone rang. It was my cousin Alicia, who happened to be a paralegal specializing in property disputes. "Vasil," she said, "I think I found something interesting about your deed." Alicia had tracked down the original subdivision plans from when Evergreen Lake Estates was first developed. "Your property was deliberately carved out of the HOA during the initial planning phase," she explained. The previous owner, Harold Jenkins, was a retired real estate attorney who insisted on it. There's specific language in the county approval documents stating that your parcel, Lot 23, shall remain in perpetuity separate from and not subject to any homeowners association covenants, conditions, or restrictions. It's ironclad, Basil. This discovery gave me a confidence boost, but it didn't stop the citations from appearing on my door. I invested in a security camera system, positioning discrete cameras to cover my driveway, dock, and the property boundaries. The footage from the first weekend was enlightening. A white SUV with Evergreen Lake security magnetically attached to the doors drove slowly past my cabin 3 times on Saturday. On Sunday morning, a man in a uniform that mimicked a police officer stepped onto my property, took photos of my deck project, and left another citation. I was fuming but determined to handle this properly. I drafted a formal cease and desist letter, had Alicia review it, and sent it via certified mail to the HOA, Layla Thalos personally, and the security company they employed. The letter clearly outlined my property's exempt status and warned that future trespassing would result in legal action. That Friday night, I discovered the cameras had been a wise investment. At around 11 o'clock, I was startled by motion alerts from my security system. The footage showed 2 men moving my property line markers several feet inward from the lake. I immediately called the sheriff's office. This time, a different deputy responded, a younger woman named Deputy Rivera, who took the matter seriously. She reviewed my camera footage and filed an official report for trespassing and property tampering. "This isn't just an HOA dispute anymore," she warned. "This is criminal, but I have to tell you, proving who sent these guys might be difficult." The next morning, I met my neighbor to the east, Greg Beckett, an older man with weathered hands and a perpetual squint from decades of fishing. He was trimming branches that hung over the narrow road we shared. "Saw the deputy last night," he commented casually. "Those HOA folks giving you trouble already?" When I explained the situation, he snorted. Talos has been trying to get control of every independent property on this lake for 3 years now. Started right after she married Philip Thalos and took over as HOA president. He lowered his voice. Word is they're planning something big that needs the whole shoreline. A marina and entertainment complex, I confirmed. I found the preliminary plans at the county office. Greg nodded grimly. That explains why they've been so aggressive with you. Your property has the deepest water access on this side. They need it for the main dock. He glanced around nervously before continuing. I've got some old documents that might help you. Surveys, original agreements. Been holding on to them since I was on the HOA board years ago, before Talos took over. Come by tomorrow morning and I'll show you. That afternoon, I noticed a new vehicle parked at the intersection of my private drive and the main road. The security SUV. Every time I left or returned, the guard made a show of writing something in a notebook. When I had guests over for a small barbecue, the guard actually approached them, claiming he needed to register all visitors per HOA regulations. My friends were confused and uncomfortable. 2 of them decided to leave rather than deal with the harassment. I called the security company directly and was told they were acting on client instructions and refused to identify their client, though it was obviously the HOA. I then contacted several other homeowners, hoping to rally support. Most were sympathetic but unwilling to get involved. We have to live here, and they can make things very difficult, one woman explained apologetically. They've fined people thousands of dollars for the smallest violations. Some folks nearly lost their home. The fear was palpable. The situation escalated when Talos apparently convinced the private road maintenance company to refuse service to non-compliant properties. After a heavy rain, the gravel road to my cabin became nearly impassable due to deep ruts and washouts that weren't repaired. Delivery trucks started refusing to navigate it. The weekly garbage collection mysteriously excluded my cabin. When I confronted the driver, he mumbled something about service area adjustments and drove away. I hired my own road contractor, who did the repairs for a reasonable price, but was disturbed when he called me afterward. Got a weird call from someone claiming to be from the county, telling me I needed a special permit to work on that road and threatening to report me. Thought you should know. The systematic isolation was becoming more than just annoying. It was affecting my ability to live normally at my own home. On Monday morning, I checked my security camera footage and felt my blood run cold. The video showed someone tampering with my property line markers at 3 a.m. Someone in what looked exactly like Layla Thalos' signature red blazer. My lucky break came through an unexpected source. I'd gone into town for coffee and supplies, trying to shake the frustration of dealing with the HOA's increasingly aggressive tactics. At the local cafe, I overheard a woman interviewing the barista about changes around the lake. I introduced myself, and that's how I met Jessica Harper, an environmental journalist investigating reports of unpermitted shoreline modification. When I mentioned Thalos Marina Developments, her eyes lit up. I've been tracking their projects across 3 counties, she explained. They have a pattern. Buy influence, manipulate local regulations, promise jobs and tax revenue, then leave environmental disasters in their wake. Their last project on Silver Creek resulted in a massive fish die-off that they blamed on natural causes. We exchanged contact information, and Jessica agreed to look into the Evergreen Lake situation. Having a journalist interested gave me a small sense of hope, but the HOA's harassment continued unabated. My mail began arriving, pre-opened or not at all. When I installed a secure locking mailbox, the harassment shifted to other targets. The local handyman who'd been helping with my cabin repairs called to apologetically cancel. Someone from the HOA called my other clients and told them I wasn't properly licensed. I am, but I can't afford to lose the business. I'm sorry, Mr. Kale. The isolation tactics were effective, but also galvanized me to fight harder. I started documenting everything meticulously, creating a timeline of harassment incidents complete with photos, videos, and witness statements when possible. Through careful networking, I discovered I wasn't alone in my concerns about the Talos development plans. Several residents had reservations, but were afraid to speak openly. I began holding casual coffee meetings at a cafe in town, safely away from the lake, where concerned neighbors could speak freely. Greg Beckett proved to be an invaluable ally. As a former HOA board member, he had kept detailed records of meetings and decisions. I never trusted how Talos took control, he explained, showing me minutes from a contentious board election 3 years earlier. There were irregularities in the voting, proxies that didn't seem legitimate. By the time anyone realized what was happening, she had replaced most of the board with her supporters. Most disturbing was his revelation about HOA finances. They've increased fees by 70% in 3 years, but services have decreased. Where's that money going? And why have they been buying up properties around the lake whenever they come up for sale? With Greg's help, I connected with other independent property owners around the lake. We formed an informal alliance, sharing information and supporting each other. When my internet service mysteriously went out, a neighbor offered to let me use their Wi-Fi. When another independent owner found their driveway blocked by accidentally felled trees, several of us showed up with chainsaws to clear it. Small acts of solidarity that sent a message. We wouldn't be isolated and intimidated individually. Jessica's first article appeared in the regional newspaper 3 weeks after our meeting. Environmental Concerns Shadow Proposed Evergreen Lake Development. The piece was carefully researched and measured, raising questions about potential environmental impacts without making direct accusations. It mentioned the unusual pattern of HOA expansion and cited anonymous residents' concerns about tactics used to pressure holdout property. The article didn't name Talos directly, but it was clear who was being referenced. The response was swift and revealing. The following day, Layla Talos and County Commissioner Daryl Phillips held an impromptu press conference announcing their exciting vision for an eco-marina that would enhance recreational opportunities while preserving the natural beauty of Evergreen Lake. The slick presentation included architectural renderings of a marina complex with restaurants, shops, and entertainment venues, all supposedly designed with environmental sensitivity. They emphasized job creation and tourism dollars, but conspicuously absent was any mention of environmental impact studies or how the project would affect current residents. That evening, Jessica called me, sounding shaken. My editor received a letter from Thalos's attorney threatening a lawsuit for defamation reporting. He's nervous about running my follow-up piece. I assured her we could provide documentation for every claim and promised to connect her with scientific experts who could evaluate the environmental concerns. They're trying to control the narrative, I told her, but facts are stubborn things. The intimidation extended beyond Jessica. My employer called me into a virtual meeting to discuss concerns about outside activities affecting client relationships. It turned out that Thalos's husband had connections to several of our major clients and had been making inquiries about my employment. My boss, to his credit, assured me my job wasn't in jeopardy, but suggested I tread carefully. The reach of Thalos's influence was becoming alarmingly clear. As Layla Thalos bragged on local television about how the eco-marina would bring jobs and prosperity to Evergreen Lake, I received a call from someone unexpected, a legislative aide to State Senator Harrison. "Mr. Kale," the young man said quietly, "I think we should talk about what's really happening at your lake. The senator has some concerns about the permitting process for this development, and we've heard you might have relevant information." After weeks of being on the defensive, it was time to flip the script. My meeting with Senator Harrison's aide, Daniel Winters, provided the opening I needed. The senator sits on the Environmental Protection Committee, Daniel explained. He's concerned about reports that Thalos Development may have begun preliminary work without proper environmental assessment. Armed with this high-level interest, I leveraged my professional expertise as an environmental consultant to examine the lake more carefully. What I discovered was damning. Under the cover of routine maintenance, Thalos had authorized dredging in several areas, work that required federal permits they hadn't obtained. I documented the violations with water samples, photographs, and GPS coordinates. When I submitted this evidence to the State Environmental Protection Office, the response was immediate. Inspectors arrived within days and issued a cease and desist order for all shoreline modifications pending a full review. This was my first real victory, but I knew B wouldn't back down easily. I needed to make my property less appealing as a target while building my legal case. That's when I implemented my first defensive measure, a completely legal sprinkler system along my property boundary triggered by motion sensors. The system was simple. Anyone crossing onto my property uninvited would get an unexpected shower. The first security guard who received this welcome was furious, but couldn't prove it was intentional. After all, many lakefront properties have irrigation systems. I took things a step further by installing wildlife deterrent speakers that played recordings of local predators when activated by motion after dark. Again, completely legal. Marketed for keeping deer out of gardens, but extremely disconcerting for security guards attempting midnight property inspections. My favorite addition was the super bright motion-activated security lights positioned strategically around my property line for safety, I explained innocently to anyone who asked. The fact that they temporarily blinded anyone trying to sneak around after dark was just a fortunate side effect. These measures made my property significantly less comfortable for HOA harassment, but Talos countered by escalating to legal channels. I received notice that the HOA had filed a lawsuit claiming I was creating a nuisance environment and deliberately interfering with community security operations. Their filing included affidavits from security personnel claiming they were just performing routine community safety checks when they were assaulted by my sprinkler system. I counterfeit immediately, submitting hours of security footage showing HOA representatives trespassing, tampering with property markers, and leaving harassing notices. I also included documentation of their interference with my mail delivery, road maintenance, and utility services. My filing specifically named Layla Thalos personally, not just the HOA, and included a demand for an injunction against further harassment. As our legal battle gained attention, Jessica Harper published a follow-up article detailing the pattern of intimidation against independent property owners around the lake. This time, her editor stood firm against legal threats, and the piece included quotes from several neighbors who had finally found the courage to speak publicly. The story caught the attention of regional TV news, which ran a segment featuring interviews with multiple residents describing HOA overreach. The public exposure began to shift dynamics within the Evergreen Lake community. Residents who had been silent started asking uncomfortable questions at HOA meetings about rising fees and the true costs of the proposed marina development. When Talos tried to push through a special assessment to fund legal assessments related to community improvement efforts, she faced unprecedented pushback. My most effective strategic move came from an unexpected angle. I organized a lake ecology education day, inviting residents and local school groups for bird watching and water quality testing. The event included experts discussing the lake's fragile ecosystem and the potential impacts of increased boat traffic and commercial development. We provided information about the critical wetland habitat that would be destroyed by the proposed marina, the habitat protected under federal law. The event was educational, positive, and completely undermined Thalos's narrative of being eco-friendly. The community response was overwhelming. Families who had never considered environmental impacts were suddenly asking questions. People who had accepted Thalos's promises of increased property values began wondering about the true costs, not just environmental, but in terms of noise, traffic, and the fundamental change to their quiet lake community. The tide of public opinion was slowly turning. Talos's response was predictably aggressive. The security presence around my property doubled. Rumors began circulating that I was anti-development and wanted to keep the lake private for elites. Then came the most alarming escalation yet. A certified letter from the county informing me that my property was being considered for condemnation under eminent domain for a public recreation access project. The letter looked official, but something felt off about the letterhead. After a quick call to my actual county office, I confirmed my suspicion. Layla Thalos had just committed mail fraud. The fraudulent condemnation notice was Thalos's biggest mistake. I immediately reported it to the postal inspector and the county sheriff, providing the fake letter along with verification from county officials that no such condemnation was being considered. Mail fraud is a federal offense, Deputy Rivera reminded me. This goes way beyond HOA bullying. With Alicia's help, I compiled a comprehensive legal dossier documenting every instance of harassment, false citation, and service interruption linked to HOA interference. Our public records requests revealed eye-opening communications between Thalos and county officials. Commissioner Phillips had officially recused himself from votes on lakefront development permits while privately advising Talos on working around those troublesome independent properties without triggering eminent domain reviews. Greg Beckett's HOA financial records proved equally valuable. Cross-referring payment dates with county records exposed how HOA funds had purchased properties that were later transferred to Talos Marina Developments at below market value. The dramatic fee increases coincided with large payments to a consulting firm owned by Talos's brother-in-law for vaguely described community enhancement planning. Armed with this evidence, I requested an emergency HOA board meeting using their own bylaws. Despite Thalos's attempts to block it, enough board members concerned about legal exposure insisted that they override him. but the internet responded to the function of democracy actually working at times. The community center was packed with curious residents that evening. I presented my findings methodically, showing the pattern of misused funds and conflicts of interest. The annual fees you've been paying increased by 70% over 3 years, I explained. During that same period, road maintenance decreased by 40%, security costs doubled despite no increase in incidents, and nearly $300,000 went to consulting services from a company that appears to do nothing but receive HOA checks. Talos attempted to dismiss me as an outsider waging a personal vendetta against improvements that would benefit everyone. To her visible shock, Greg Beckett stood up. "I've lived on this lake for 32 years, he said firmly. "I was on this HOA board before you arrived. I've watched you systematically dismantle community protections and replace them with rules serving your development plans." Other residents began asking pointed questions about misused fees and undisclosed plans. When cornered about property transfers, Talos abruptly ended the meeting and stormed out. Her retreat only fueled residents' determination to investigate further, forming committees to audit the HOA's books independently. Talos's next move was both desperate and dangerous, filing a false police report claiming I had threatened her during the meeting. When I arrived for questioning, Sheriff Braddock studied me thoughtfully. Got a call from Commissioner Phillips about that troublemaker on the lake. Then another from Mrs. Talos about supposed threats. "But I also got calls from 7 different residents praising your presentation." He leaned back. "I've been a sheriff here for 18 years. I know political pressure when I see it. So why don't you tell me what's really going on?" After our conversation, Braddock agreed to review all my evidence, including the fraudulent letter. "If this is genuine mail fraud, I'll make sure the federal authorities give it proper attention," he promised. For the first time, local law enforcement was taking the situation seriously. That evening, I returned to find my cabin door unlocked and my laptop moved. The security footage revealed Layla Talos herself downloading files from my computer. The game had completely changed. I had anticipated someone might try to access my computer. After the HOA meeting, it was clear Talos would be desperate to know what evidence I had and what I planned to do with it. That's why I'd prepared a special surprise. A folder prominently labeled Settlement Draft, containing a fabricated agreement in which I would supposedly accept $50,000 and sign an NDA about all HOA activities in exchange for selling my property at a below-market price. The document contained just enough factual background to be believable, mixed with completely fabricated claims about verbal agreements made between myself and Talos. The trap was meticulously constructed. I'd created time-stamped digital breadcrumbs showing when I'd created the document, included details only Talos would recognize about their development plans, and even added fictional meeting dates that could easily be disproven. I'd consulted with a cybersecurity expert friend who helped me set up a tracking mechanism on the file itself. If anyone copied it, I'd know exactly when and potentially where it went afterward. It wasn't just a trap. It was a digital minefield designed specifically for someone overconfident enough to think they could outsmart me with a simple break-in. My security system had captured perfect footage of Talos entering my home with what appeared to be a copied key, going straight to my computer, accessing files, and copying data to a USB drive. The footage was damning. It showed her methodically searching through my folders, her face clearly visible in the monitor's reflection. When she found the settlement draft, she spent nearly 20 minutes reading through documents, occasionally taking photos with her phone, before copying several files to her USB drive. I immediately called Sheriff Braddock and sent him the footage. Deputies arrived within an hour to take statements and collect evidence of the break-in. I didn't mention the planted document. That was my ace in the hole. The next day, I filed for an emergency restraining order against Talos personally and the HOA security team, citing the break-in and pattern of harassment. The judge granted it immediately, ordering Talos to maintain at least 100 yards distance from me and my property. HOA security was prohibited from entering my property under any circumstances. For the first time in months, I could relax slightly at home. I upgraded my locks and security system anyway, adding cameras with night vision capability and motion sensors that would alert both my phone and the sheriff's office directly if triggered. News of Talos' break-in spread quickly through the community. The security company, unwilling to be associated with such blatantly illegal activity, terminated their contract with the HOA, issuing a public statement distancing themselves from what they called extra-legal enforcement actions they had been directed to perform. Several board members resigned, citing personal concerns about liability. Commissioner Phillips publicly announced he would recuse himself from all matters related to Evergreen Lake developments, though he insisted it was due to the increasingly contentious atmosphere rather than any wrongdoing. The fallout affected Thalos' business relationships too. A prominent local banker, who'd been seen frequently with Thalos at community events, abruptly canceled a planned joint appearance. 2 County Planning Commission members, who had previously voted in favor of preliminary permits for the marina, requested a formal review of the approval process. The ecosystem of influence Thalos had carefully cultivated was showing signs of strain as people scrambled to protect their own reputations. Jessica Harper published her most detailed article yet, outlining the connections between Phillips, Thalos, and several county officials who had fast-tracked permits for previous marina developments despite environmental concerns. She included quotes from former employees of Thalos Marina Developments describing a corporate culture of cutting corners and manipulating local government 1S. The piece revealed a pattern spanning 3 counties where environmental protections had been bypassed through a combination of political donations, personal relationships, and creative interpretation of regulations. The article ended with questions about the source of funding for the Evergreen Lake project, suggesting investors might be getting nervous about the mounting controversies. When I read Jessica's article, I called to congratulate her on the thorough research. "I'm still getting threats," she admitted. "Someone called my editor claiming to represent a major advertiser, hunting they might pull their business if certain stories continued. Thankfully, my editor told them journalistic integrity wasn't for sale." Jessica had also been approached about a surprisingly lucrative job offer at a publication owned by one of Talos' business associates, an obvious attempt to silence her reporting with a golden handcuff. She'd declined, choosing instead to continue her investigation. Talos' attorney contacted me with a settlement offer. If I would drop all complaints and sell my property, they would pay 20% above market value and cover my legal expenses. It was substantially more money than I had invested in the property, a tempting offer that would let me walk away financially ahead. The attorney, a smooth-talking man named Lawrence Graves, emphasized how I could use the money to find an even better property without all these complications. Asked for 48 hours to consider it, using that time to consult with Alicia about our legal strategy. "They're desperate," she concluded after reviewing the offer. "They know how much evidence you have of illegal activity, not just HOA overreach. But Basil, if you take this offer, everyone else around the lake remains vulnerable. This isn't just about your property anymore." She pointed out how the settlement included a confidentiality clause that would prevent me from sharing any information about Talos activities with other homeowners, environmental agencies, or Jessica. "They're not just buying your land, they're buying your silence." She was right, of course. This had become about standing up to corruption and protecting the entire lake community and ecosystem. I rejected the offer. Graves called repeatedly over the next day, each time increasing the offer slightly. By his 4th call, there was an edge of desperation in his voice. "My client is prepared to be extremely generous, Mr. Kale. This could set you up very comfortably. Why fight a battle you don't need to fight?" I politely declined each time, finally telling him, "Mr. Graves, this isn't about money. It's about accountability." There was a long pause before he sighed. "Then I'm afraid we'll see you in court." 2 days before our scheduled court date for my harassment and trespassing lawsuit against the HOA, I received a surprising legal filing. Thalos' attorneys had submitted a motion to dismiss, claiming we had already reached a settlement agreement, and attached was the exact fake document I had planted on my computer. I could hardly believe they had fallen for it so completely. They had just submitted fabricated evidence to the court, not realizing it was my creation specifically designed to trap them. The document even contained several telltale watermarks and hidden metadata that proved its origin on my computer, details I had added specifically for this moment. I immediately filed a response pointing out that the document was fraudulent, explaining how it had been planted as a trap after previous break-ins, and included security footage showing Thalos stealing the document from my computer. I requested sanctions against Thalos and her attorneys for submitting fraudulent evidence. The judge was furious, ordering an immediate hearing and instructing Thalos and her attorney to appear in person. The hearing was scheduled for the following day, but that evening my confidence was shaken by a discovery. Going through additional evidence provided through discovery, I found documentation suggesting the judge assigned to our case, Judge Raymond, had received campaign donations from Talos Developments during his last election. While not illegal, it raised serious concerns about impartiality. Digging deeper, I uncovered records of Judge Raymond attending a community leadership dinner hosted by Talos 3 weeks earlier, an event not disclosed in his conflict screening. I began preparing a motion for recusal, uncertain whether it would help or hurt our case. The first sign that something was wrong came during the hearing's opening statements. Judge Raymond seemed dismissive of my evidence, cutting off my attorney repeatedly while giving Talos's lawyer considerable leeway. When we presented the security footage of the break-in, the judge suggested it could have been staged and questioned its admissibility. His hostility toward our case was barely concealed. When my attorney attempted to introduce the evidence of the judge's undisclosed connections to Talos, Raymond became visibly angry, threatening contempt charges for impugning the court's integrity. My heart sank as I realized we might lose despite overwhelming evidence. During a recess, my attorney looked grim. Something's not right. The judge is deliberately ignoring clear evidence. I think we need to prepare for the possibility that he's going to rule against us regardless of what we present. He explained that appealing an unfavorable ruling would be expensive and time-consuming, with no guarantee of success. The system works well when everyone plays by the rules. When they don't, when judges, local officials, and wealthy interests align, it can be nearly impossible for an individual to prevail. For the first time, I considered that taking the settlement might have been the wiser choice, not for the money, but because fighting corrupt officials who protected each other might be futile. When court reconvened, I made a surprising announcement through my attorney. Your Honor, in the interest of community harmony, my client is willing to discuss settlement terms with the HOA. Talos looked triumphant as the judge ordered us to attempt settlement negotiations before proceeding. In the courthouse conference room, Talos couldn't contain her smugness. Finally being reasonable, Mr. Kale? I knew you'd come around eventually. I smiled politely, but said nothing as our attorneys discussed terms. That evening, dejected, I sat on my dock watching the sunset, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake by not selling when I had the chance. A quiet footstep on the wooden planks alerted me to a visitor. Greg Beckett approached, his expression tense. "Heard you're considering settlement," he said without preamble. "After everything, you're going to let them win?" I explained about the judge's bias and the uphill battle we faced. Greg listened silently, then nodded once. "Wait here." He returned to his car and came back with a small USB drive in his weathered hand. "I've had this for years," he whispered, but was too scared to show anyone. "It's a video of Layla admitting the whole development scheme and how she's been paying off Judge Raymond to rule in their favor on property disputes. Recorded it at a board meeting when she thought only her supporters were present." He pressed the drive into my palm. I was on the board, remember? Had my phone recording for my own meeting notes. Never thought I'd need to use it like this. I stared at the tiny device in my hand. "Greg, this could change everything. Why didn't you share this sooner?" He looked out over the water, his expression pained. Fear, pure and simple. These people destroyed the last person who stood up to them, bankrupted him with legal fees and spread rumors that ruined his business. I've lived here my whole life. It's all I have. He met my eyes directly. But I can't watch them destroy this lake. Maybe I'm too old to be afraid anymore. The courtroom was packed on the morning of what would become the final hearing. News of our case had spread throughout the county, drawing curious residents, environmental activists, and even a few state officials. Judge Raymond entered, looking confident, clearly expecting to oversee a simple settlement approval. His expression faltered slightly when my attorney stood and announced, "Your Honor, my client has reconsidered and wishes to proceed with the full hearing. Additionally, we are filing this motion for your immediate recusal from this case, along with new evidence that has just come to our attention." The judge's face darkened as he reviewed our motion, which referenced the video without describing its specific contents, requesting the matter be referred to a judicial conduct review. "This is highly irregular, counsel. We were proceeding towards settlement yesterday," my attorney stood firm. "New evidence has materialized that makes settlement impossible, Your Honor. And this evidence directly impacts the court's impartiality." After a tense sidebar discussion, Judge Raymond abruptly announced he would recuse himself to avoid any appearance of impropriety and stormed out of the courtroom. The case was reassigned to Judge Harriet Kimball, a recently appointed judge known for her strict ethical standards. She scheduled a new hearing for the following week, ordering all evidence to be resubmitted for her review. When we reconvened before Judge Kimball, the dynamics had shifted dramatically. Greg Beckett had courageously agreed to testify about the recording and its context. Jessica Harper was present, with her documentation of environmental violations and permit irregularities. Most surprising was the appearance of a representative from the Environmental Protection Agency, who had been quietly investigating Talos Marina developments for violations at multiple sites. Judge Kimball allowed all evidence, including the damning recording of Talos discussing judicial bribes in her development strategy. "We need Raymond to handle any lakefront disputes," Talos could be clearly heard saying. "He knows his retirement condo depends on this project moving forward." The courtroom sat in stunned silence as the recording played. Talos' attorney attempted to have it excluded as illegally obtained, but Judge Kimball overruled the objection, noting that Georgia was a one-party consent state for recordings. The EPA representative testified next, detailing how Talos' previous marina projects had violated multiple federal regulations, resulting in significant environmental damage. He confirmed that preliminary work at Evergreen Lake had already violated wetland protection laws, and that permits had been improperly fast-tracked without required environmental impact studies. Layla Thalos took the stand in her own defense, attempting to portray herself as a community leader being persecuted for trying to bring economic development to the area. Under cross-examination, however, her carefully constructed facade crumbled. When confronted with financial records showing HOA funds being channeled to her development company, she claimed they were loans that would be repaid, but could produce no loan documents. Asked about the break-in at my cabin, she initially denied being present until shown the security footage, then claimed she was invited, but couldn't explain why she arrived with a copied key when no one was home. The turning point came when my attorney questioned her about the falsified settlement document. "Mrs. Thalos, can you explain how a document created on my client's computer, which you accessed illegally during a break-in, captured on security video, ended up being submitted to this court as evidence?" Her attorney objected vehemently, but the damage was done. Thalos looked trapped, her composure finally shattering. "You don't understand," she snapped. "That property is essential for the marina. The whole project falls apart without it. Do you have any idea how much money is at stake?" Judge Kimball's ruling was comprehensive and decisive. She found the HOA and Layla Thalos personally liable for harassment, trespassing, mail fraud, and abuse of process. She ordered the HOA to pay $50,000 in damages, with Thalos personally responsible for my legal fees. Most importantly, she issued a permanent injunction preventing the HOA from attempting to enforce any regulations on properties outside their legal boundaries and ordered a full financial audit of HOA accounts. The judge also referred the evidence of judicial misconduct to the State Ethics Commission and the evidence of environmental violations to the EPA for further action. Commissioner Phillips, who had been observing from the back of the courtroom, slipped out during the ruling, but not before reporters noticed his hasty departure. Within days, he would announce his resignation for personal reasons. The aftermath transformed Evergreen Lake. The HOA board was completely reconstituted in a special election, with Greg Beckett elected as the new president on a platform of transparency and limited regulation. The marina development project was permanently shelved after investors withdrew in the wake of the scandal and EPA investigations. Instead, the community began working with environmental groups to establish parts of the shoreline as a protected habitat. Thalotho Marina developments faced investigations in multiple counties, with previous projects subjected to retroactive environmental review and substantial fines. Layla Thalos resigned from all public positions and eventually moved away after her company filed for bankruptcy protection. Judge Raymond announced his early retirement before the judicial ethics investigation could be completed. 1 year later, I hosted a community celebration at my cabin, now fully restored with a thriving native plant garden along the shoreline. Neighbors who had once been afraid to speak to me stopped by throughout the day, many expressing gratitude for standing firm against the corruption that had slowly infiltrated their community. Jessica Harper was there too, proudly showing off her Regional Journalism Award for the investigative series that had grown from our initial meeting. Greg Beckett and I sat on my dock that evening after most guests had left, watching fireflies dance above the water. "You know," he mused, "I've been on this lake for nearly 35 years. Watched developers come and go, each with grand plans to improve it. But this is the first time I've seen the lake win. I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. The natural beauty and tranquility that had drawn all of us here remained preserved, at least for now. I used part of the settlement money to establish a legal defense fund for homeowners facing similar HOA overreach, working with Alicia to provide resources and representation to those who couldn't afford to fight back alone. The fund had already helped residents in 2 neighboring counties stand up to predatory development practices. The rest went toward purchasing a strategic parcel of land adjacent to my property, the exact spot where Thalos had planned to build the marina's main office. Instead, it became a community wildlife observation area, with educational signage about the lake's ecosystem and the importance of conservation. Sometimes justice comes with a hefty price tag, but watching Lele Thalos write that $50,000 check with tears in her eyes, absolutely priceless. And the best part? I used that money to buy the lakefront lot next door, the exact spot where she planned to build her marina office. Now, it's a community garden and bird observation station. Karma really is beautiful, isn't it?
That's a wrap from QA Stories, but don't go far. There's plenty more drama, twists, and unbelievable stories waiting for you on our channel.